We have a real treat for you today. So, if you're interested in the Shroud of Turin and you'd like to see an honest investigation of it and a review, we're also going to chat a little bit about last night's debate. So, there was a great debate on the Shroud of Turin between Dale Glover of Real Seekers and Jordan of Reason to Doubt. And both Joe Marino and I happened to be in the chat. I didn't catch the very beginning of the debate at the time, but I caught the end of the debate. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the primary arguments. So the person who was against the Shroud of Turin's authenticity, his primary argument to me seemed to be that he was relying on the 1988 carbon dating. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that, tear that apart, or what we find other very admissible data that we might want to use to consider the dating of the Shroud of Turin. Now, of course, if you don't know, the Shroud of Turin is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. He was wrapped in a shroud, according to Joseph of Arimathea. There are a number of theories on how the shroud passed its way through the centuries and how we have it now today in a place called Turin, Italy. It was about 14 feet by 3 feet. It bears a perfect image in 3D of a man. They've done a number of studies on the shroud and they found that this is not painted on. It's basically this image that a lot of people say comes on there from radiation. So before I go on here, and I just want to say thank you so much for our two persons here today, because initially I didn't realize Joe would come in. Susan gave me that great idea. And so he's here as an expert who's been somebody who's rattling people's cages who believe the shroud is inauthentic. So let's first start with Dale, and then we'll go to Joe. So Dale, what do you think about last night's debate and sort of the evidence that you find very compelling?
Yeah, so in general, I thought it was a great debate. I think it was one of the best discussions I've had with an atheist on the Shroud of Turin. So I want to say thank you so much to Jordan, if he's seeing this, for providing that. And he takes it seriously. He actually reads the peer-reviewed papers. Obviously, he's brand new to the Shroud, but he's done way more than Pine Creek Doug or some of the other atheists have done. So I just want to say thank you for providing that kind of effort into the debate. In terms of the characterization, I do agree with you, Stephanie, there. Do I call you SJ or?
Either one. Either
Doesn't
one.
matter. Okay. So yeah, I agree with your characterization. For Jordan, it's all about that carbon-14 dating. He thinks that the most reasonable or probable position is to take those dates as is, that the shroud is in fact medieval. And obviously, I totally disagree with that. I think that we have multiple undercutting defeaters that really say, look, we can't have any confidence, even on a balance of probabilities, that the shroud is medieval on the sole basis of the 1988 dating. And coincidentally, I'll just end with this before we go to Joe. Interestingly enough, even the ultimate shroud skeptic, Hugh Ferry, who's in the comments, hello, Hugh, I bet you're here, but even he agrees with me on this front, that you can't say that the shroud is medieval on the basis of the carbon dating alone. So that's interesting. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. And I will say just really quickly that the debate last night was very cordial. I very much enjoyed the way that you two interacted. I thought you presented yourself as a very humble and good servant of Jesus. So thank you so much. So Joe, welcome. I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, I enjoyed the debate last night too. I thought it was very civil, and you don't often see that when people on opposite sides of the shroud talk. So I thought that was very welcome. And I did think that Jordan does his homework. I agree with Dale. There are a lot of people that come on podcasts to contest the shroud's authenticity. They do little or no homework most of the time. I did think he did make sort of one less than appropriate comment about a part of Jesus's anatomy. I won't say the word, but other than that, he was very cordial and good exchange, and I really did enjoy it. I think one of the things that always comes up for me in these debates is just trying to figure out where they're coming from. And pro authenticity people are often accused of having a bias, but I always think, well, is an agnostic or an atheist any less objective than a Christian? Just I think we all have biases that we have to overcome, but I think a lot of people, if they're an atheist, when they learn about the shroud, their first reaction is, and they might not even think of this consciously, but I think what's going on is they think, uh-oh, if the shroud really is real and it did wrap Jesus and it's connected to the resurrection, my worldview's in trouble. Ergo, I have to contest this and dispute it. So I think that's where, and I'm not sure if Jordan's in that camp or not, but I would point out that people that are atheists have just as strong a bias against it as some Christians might have for it. And I think the key is no Christian will say, you have to believe in the shroud or we have to have it. Now, by the same token, the shroud can help people lead. They can lead people to Jesus, but in the end, when all is said and done, the shroud's not the only factor. There's other things going on. So the whole dynamics of how people believe and disbelieve and why they do and why they don't is all very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And so you're right. And so we don't need the shroud to prove that Jesus existed or to give us for our Christianity to be true. It's a nice bonus though. And I think in 1898, when they took the first photo of it and saw how the image was really brought out by the black, the reverse imaging, it was just very interesting. And so I think that heightened a lot of people's interests. And so there's a couple of arguments now. Dale, you said that you looking at one of the things that I found Joe originally is because I decided I wanted to look into the shroud, and I remember the carbon dating from 1988, and I remember all those newspaper articles way back when and how the New York Times and everybody jumped on the shroud and said it wasn't true and that kind of stuff. But Joe and his wife, Sue, decided to look into a lot of this stuff, and I found them and I found some of their interviews, and they looked at this little piece of the cloth, the sample itself, and they had suspected that perhaps this was supposed to be linen, but there was some cotton interwoven in it. They took sample, or you actually investigated it. And so can you tell us a little bit about that? And then Dale thinks that there are some other pieces of evidence that are even more compelling going beyond this whole thing. And so wanted to see if we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And by you mean like in terms of dating, like outside of the carbon dating?
Yeah, if we focus on the dating first, but then also just on the image itself and how it's never been able to be replicated. And so that's pretty, I think we should talk about that too.
Cool. All right, cool. So in terms of the invisible reweave, obviously I've had Joe's my friend. I've had him on the show many times, advancing his theory. And I do think that there is empirical evidence and findings that are supportive of this theory. You can't just dismiss those. And one of those is what you mentioned there, Stephanie, about the cotton being woven there into that portion of the Shroud of Turin. Obviously, I myself don't go for the invisible reweave. I disagree with it. I think that it's improbable, and that's why I go for the neutron absorption on my end as the more likely explanation for that. Yeah, so that's kind of my take on the carbon dating. I don't deny the evidence. I think that there are explanations for them. So, for example, with the cotton, I think that could be explained. It got ingrained in there during the manufacturing process when they were constructing it and stuff. If there was cotton from the last thing that they made, that could have gotten mixed up into the shroud. And I think that's an equally probable explanation kind of thing. In terms of other dating methods, absolutely. I mean, you heard me in the debate. There's at least 16 other dating techniques. Mm-hmm. All of these contradict the medieval hypothesis. And one of the ones that I was talking about in the debate last night was the Sudarium of Oviedo. I think that's very powerful evidence because it's a forensic link. This is science too. If you're an atheist, this is science. You ask for scientific evidence, here it is, right? And there have been these forensic links between the various blood stains on the cloth, even to the point where half of a blood stain is on one cloth and the other corresponding half is on the other. Mm-hmm. there's a bunch of evidence that just contradicts it. And if you're following the totality of the evidence, you can't rationally believe the shroud is medieval.
Yeah, so let's maybe talk about some of that evidence. So, and both of us can all talk about it. So we mentioned this, the Sodarium of Oviedo, and you mentioned the blood match. That's one. And so we also have limestone, pollen, a number of other things that also put it to the first century AD and also put it to Jerusalem. And so I wanted to see if we wanted to get into that a little bit too.
So that's so I answered you. I got your little your comment there, and I answered that. So one thing I don't understand, I've never heard anyone use like the pollen or the limestone, or there's the third thing that you mentioned. I think it was the burial ointment.
Burial ointment, yeah.
So I'm not sure how that proves it's first century specifically. It's consistent with it, but like, where do you get the first century?
Well, with the burial ointment specifically, is they've found that those were the ointments that were commonly used in the first century, and all the way up until the middle of the the middle of the third century. So they used that very commonly, but they weren't using it after that. Those particular ointments and the flowers that they found that related to the pollen were something that were present at the time, apparently in ancient Near East in that time. The particular brand of flowers were an ancient floral.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. That's why I kind of argued it's 300 AD or earlier kind of thing, right? So, yep, I fully agree. So, cool.
So, Joe, you want to tell us how you got involved into this whole thing? I know that you were looking at this little corner and you sent out, I think you sent samples out. You want to tell us that story?
Well, I had originally met Sue in 1997 when she first learned about the shroud, and by that time I had been studying it like 20 years, and I eventually I was actually in the monastery at the time, and one thing led to another, and I actually left the monastery and ended up with Sue. We got married, and we did shroud research together. And when the C14 dating came out, by that time it was like anybody that had studied the shroud had said something has to be wrong with that C14 date. There's just simply too much evidence pointing toward authenticity. So I have one of the largest personal English language collections in the world. And at one point, Sue had the insight that it could have been a repair in that area. So because I had such a good collection, we got out the best pictures and whatnot. And she sent pictures. We didn't actually have any samples of the shroud. Sometimes you see that in the literature that we had a sample or something. We didn't. We just used pictures, and we sent pictures to 3 different textile experts. One who actually lived in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. There was a place in downtown Columbus called I think it was called French Tailors or something like that. Anyway, the guy there was actually European born, and he was called French. His nickname was Frenchy, and we gave him a close-up picture of the Zurich sample and did not tell him it was from the shroud. And we just basically said, what can you tell us, from your expertise about this? And he said that it appeared to be manipulated. We thought, well, that's interesting, but one opinion isn't quite enough. So we sent it to a place in Albany, New York. Did not tell them it was a picture of the shroud. Asked them the same question. Kind of got the same response. It was manipulated. Sent a picture to Thomas Ferguson Limited in I think it's Dublin, Ireland, one of the big, most renowned textile places in the world. And same thing, sent them the picture, didn't tell them it was the shroud. They said it was manipulated. So we had 3 independent blinded textile experts that all said it was manipulated. So we thought we were onto something. So right when we were doing our research, we had learned that there was going to be a conference in Orvieto, Italy, and we thought, well, this could make a pretty good paper, so we decided to go. And we presented our findings. We did some additional research, historical and whatnot, and wrote up a paper, which we presented there. And Barry Schwartz of Shroud.com, he was the documenting photographer for STURP. He was at the conference, taking pictures and whatnot, and reporting for his website. And he came up to us after the presentation was over and asked if he could publish our paper on his website, and we said sure. And he kind of told us later on, he says he was so kind of happy to see this theory because it was simple, it was direct. You didn't have to have a degree in physics to understand it. And so he published the paper, and then Ray Rogers, who was the head of the chemistry section of STURP, he had been pretty much out of Shroud research ever since the carbon dating, because he basically accepted it. And he had started to get back into it a little bit, and he saw that Barry published our paper. So he called Barry up and he says, "What are you doing publishing this blankety blank stuff?" And Ray says, I can disprove this in 5 minutes, because Ray was the only one in the world at that time that he had samples from 1978 from the main part of the cloth, which he was entitled to do under the agreement. And he also had a sample of what's called the Reyes sample, which was originally taken in 1973. It was right next to where the C14 sample was taken. And Gilbert Reyes is named after Gilbert Reyes, the Belgian textile expert. And so Ray said, I can compare the two samples, presume on the assumption that what was in the Reyes sample would probably be in the C14 sample. So, he did not think he would find anything out of the ordinary. He thought Sue and I were part of the lunatic fringe. He said so in the press. And he told Barry he would disprove it in 5 minutes. Well, it took him about an hour and a half, and he called Barry back and he says, "I can't believe it." He says, "I think they're right." So he found a spliced cotton and linen thread. He found mordant and gum and dye, all the things that you would have if you had a repair in that section. So he continued his research. We continued ours. He came out with a big peer-reviewed article in Thermochimica Acta in 2005 in January, and unfortunately he died in March of that year. And then Sue and I continued our research, and unfortunately Sue passed away in April 2009, and I've continued my research. And I'm hoping I presented last on the reweave theory at a conference in Canada in 2019. And I'm hoping to present an update of the paper. I've had some additional significant information to add to it. And I may be giving it remotely. There's going to be a conference in Mexico City in late May this year. And I've been invited to speak. We're trying to work out details if I can present the updated version of that paper.
No, that's a very good summary. I really appreciate that. And so let's go over to Dale. Dale, you want to add to any of that, or do you want to also focus on some of your arguments, your other arguments? Because you had 16, so you weren't even focused on this one quite as much. You were focused on some other ones, and I didn't know if you wanted to comment or add. So yes. I think the bottom line, Joe has spent his life obviously really digging into this, so I think he's a valuable asset here too. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I fully support Joe's rigorous research. And I mean, he's written an amazing book advancing the invisible reweave hypothesis and that sort of thing. So I respect that. I mean, that's why I have Joe on my show all the time, advancing his theory. I mean, his knowledge about the shroud and the evidences and the arguments that people have raised is amazing. So, okay, so just before I go into other dating thing, one question for you, Joe, about the invisible reweave, because obviously I disagree with you on that. I remember when you were debating Bob Rucker, there were a couple of issues that came up where you said you needed to consult Eric Jumper to finish that. So one of them that I remember was about the fact that if the invisible reweave hypothesis is true, you need about 86% new material from 1520 and only 16 or 14% old material. So that was an objection that Bob gave. Did you look into that with Eric Jumper at all and get an answer?
I think I contacted him, but I don't recall getting a response from him. But he is an advocate of the theory, and in fact, he wrote a little piece in my C14 book. I don't think that's specifically addressed in it, but in fact, he's told me he doesn't even understand why anyone brings up any other theory besides this one. That's how strongly he believes in it. So I think it's a matter. It's kind of a microcosm of the whole shroud question, in that, a lot of us say the authenticity is based on kind of the preponderance of the evidence. And when I look at the invisible reweave, I look at all the independent researchers that I've consulted, and they all, independent of one another, give an idea that it was manipulated, repaired, and that sort of thing. And, and I guess you could, skeptics sometimes nitpick at this point or that point, and they come up with something negative and they think they disprove the whole thing. But I believe that the totality of the empirical evidence accumulated in terms of there being an invisible reweave is very compelling. And, it would be nice if the Turin authorities would allow additional testing. Now, I've heard when they did the restoration in 2002 that they did sort of look more specifically into the invisible reweave. Now, they don't necessarily still buy it, but I think we need more than just sort of an informal look at it. We need to get a qualified team of scientists to do testing on that and many other areas. I mean, can you imagine how much more we could learn about the shroud based on today's science compared to 1978? I mean, the sky would be the limit on that. And I guess we probably won't get any testing while Pope Francis is alive, but we can all pray that maybe the next Pope will allow some testing.
Awesome.
Yeah, good. So that's one hypothesis that does resolve the issue of carbon dating in 1988. Or if you agree with the hypothesis, which actually I do too, I actually agree with the hypothesis. But if I want to go into some other, because there are some other factors that place it back there. We talked a little bit about a couple of them, but what the coins, some have even looked at the coins that they say were over Jesus's eyes and dated those to under, I think, I want to say, I can't remember which.
690 to 695.
No, you're talking the pilot coins, did you say?
Yeah,
over the
pilot.
eyes? Yeah, those were minted 29 to 32 AD. So that would be, if you could prove that there were coins there, yeah, that'd be more accurate probably than carbon dating. But there's a bit dispute about that. A lot of people don't, like Barry, for instance. This is one area where Barry and I disagree. He says the weave of the cloth is such that you wouldn't be able to discern the letters on the coins that people supposedly see. And my contention is, well, if you've got an image a whole image, double image that you can't explain, what's really rational about the plausibility of being able to see coins on the eyes?
Sorry.
So in other words, I believe, I don't know if we'll ever be able to prove that unless we do some more research again, but I think it's sort of like, I think it's God's sense of humor coming through. And I think he probably put those coins there knowing that somebody was going to find them. And it's not absolute proof. It's sort of like the empty tomb. You know, the empty tomb isn't absolute proof that Jesus rose from the dead, but it's a pretty good, if you take it, all the evidence into account, it's a big part of the question. And the coins are the same way. If they're there, it can help pinpoint the date of the crucifixion, I think.
Yeah. So we've been talking about dating. I want to talk about the image itself and the fact that the man who was in the image, the evidence that he had been whipped around 100 times, I believe. All of these whip marks. There were consistencies with having some sort of a crown thing or some sort of thorns over his head. There's definitely consistency with where he had been stabbed by the Roman centurion. There's consistency with a man who had been on a cross because of the way the body was kind of, the way it shows that how his legs were bent. So he had this sort of, I forget the word, but the legs were actually in the same that they would be if you had been on the cross. And there was consistency with just the way the hands were and some early ancient art. And so I just wanted to see, can we go into that direction to talk about the image?
Yeah. And is it okay if, because you asked me to list just a few of
yeah, I'd love that.
dating things, so I didn't get a chance to do that. So let me just do that now, kind of thing. So like some of the ones that convinced me obviously are the Sudarium of Oviedo, which was in my debate last night. But beyond that, I'm convinced by the Hungarian Prey Codex. I think that thing was made by someone looking at the shroud. We have those L-shaped poker holes, which correlates with the shroud. That's one of the most convincing factors. We also have what I thought you were talking about there, Stephanie, with the coins was Giulio Fonte has done a statistical assessment of these Justinian II coins. They were minted in 692 to 695 AD. And there's a 99.99% probability. It's something like 1 in like 7 billion or 7 billion billion or something like that probability that the guy who made those coins saw the shroud. So I think that's another bit of convincing evidence there. Beyond that, yeah, you kind of mentioned the paintings and stuff like that. Like, I'm assuming you're meaning like the Vinian markings or the Christ Pantocrator icon being influenced by the shroud. And also we have Giulio Fonte's, those if you like the scientific dating, we have those various empirical dating, FTIR spectroscopy, Raman spectroscopy dating, the newest X-ray dating that just happened in 2022, all consistent with the first century date and overrule a medieval date. It can't be medieval kind of thing. So those are just the sum of the dating things I look at.
And yeah, so those, I mean, I think all of those are convincing. And so
awesome. So you're asking about the image.
The image itself, I think, is fascinating just because they have not been able to replicate it. And they think that it's some sort of a burst of light or radiation, which is something that you would think a divine source would produce. And so I think, and it's also consistent with apparently when people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been bombed by the atomic bomb, their images of a few people were actually projected like through radiation onto some walls. And so it's kind of a similar idea that this massive amount of radiation went through. And so
absolutely, yeah, no, it's so this is kind of my bread and butter when I focus on the shroud, my shroud solo shows and stuff. I'm primarily, what converted me is the nature of these images. I have what I call this minimal relevant features approach. So it's kind of similar to the minimal facts approach for the historical evidence, right? So I take the firmly established, scientifically proven physical and chemical properties of those images. Things like you mentioned it's three-dimensional. It has the photonegativity. It's also one of the most important facts to me, even more important than the 3D stuff, is the fact that it was vertically, whatever thing encoded the images was vertically aligned, meaning it's a rectilinear or a curvilinear process. That rules out a whole bunch of mechanisms and stuff like that. It's also superficial, and the body image color is uniform. It's the same intensity of color everywhere. So these are some of the features there. And I've looked at all of the ordinary artistic mechanisms that have been proposed. All of them fail. None of them can explain all of these minimal relevant features that are required. And it's the same with ordinary naturalistic mechanisms as well, direct contact or gas diffusion. I've ruled these out as well. So in terms of radiation, I do think that that's if the most likely explanation. That's the one I go for. There have been some unbelievers who've tried to use radiation externally to explain the shroud images. So that would be a natural thing. But again, that doesn't work either, because again, you have these high resolution images. So the radiation has to be emitted from the body, and that's supernatural. So yeah.
Yeah, great answers.
Thanks. I try.
Yeah. So in addition to that, so we have a few of those sorts of things. You mentioned briefly, and I want to see if you want to expand on this. Some people might not be familiar with the Sodarium of Oviedo and the connections that you talked about last night with the shroud.
Yeah.
And when that was, so there was like a cloth that Jesus used to wipe his face. And then there was the shroud, which was what was wrapping Jesus. One was obviously a much more expensive material from what I understand. The shroud was a very high dollar material, consistent with the rich man, Joseph of Arimathea. And the cloth wasn't as high dollar, but you talked about the link.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that this is incredible. There are several lines of evidences establishing this connection that I kind of raised on the debate last night, right? So number one, there are various anatomical similarities, right? So the nose is the same size, the position and size of the mouth, the chin, even the shape of the beard. There's even evidence like lack of on the right cheek. There's like a lack of it shows swelling on the shroud man, and that its sign is on the Sudarium as well. Also, there are these studies on the blood stains, which is pretty impressive to me, whereby I kind of mentioned that earlier, right? But Caesar Barta has done studies where he's confirmed there's this high percentage of correspondence, 75% for like the crown of thorn wounds between the shroud and the Sudarium. And he's tested random distribution. So he's, the skeptics will say, yeah, but you can get similar stains from different people. That, of course, there's nothing special there. But we've done actual experiments and proven that random distributions will not provide that high level of correspondence. So that kind of rules out that objection. There's also Caesar Barta, who's on my show, talks about X-ray fluorescence studies. And this is about that limestone dust. So right at the tip of the nose, they have this extremely high, which is not expected at all, concentration of the specific type of limestone dust. And that corresponds to the tip of the nose of the Sudarium man. And it also is consistent with limestone dust from Calvary in Jerusalem. So that's kind of a geographical link that people say there. And then the other thing was the pollen that I think you explained. That was the last one, where it's like they have this specific pollen genus that was only used in ancient burial rituals up to the Great Crisis of the 3rd century. After that, they stopped using these botanical products. So this places the date for the Sudarium to, I said 300 AD or earlier. So yeah.
Yeah. So how do you figure that the shroud got to where it is today? So a lot of times people say, well, the reason we talk about the medieval dating is because that's when it came out in the 1300s. It started being well known, or some have said 1207. But then, how do you think it traveled? What's the hypothesis?
Yes, so I'll be honest, I'm working this out. I just did a panel review show with. I had Pam Moon on the show, and I had so she goes for her. The main theory with Ian Wilson and a lot of the pro shroud experts is that, well, the Shroud of Turin was what's known as the image of Edessa. So basically, from Jerusalem, it was taken to Edessa, and it was hidden in a wall for about 500 years or something, and was forgotten about. Then during, was it an earthquake, Joe, or was it a
flood?
Flood. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. During a flood, the wall, that part of the wall collapsed, and they rediscovered the Shroud of Turin. They said, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing!" It became the image of Edessa. Then from there, it was taken to Constantinople in 944 AD. And it stayed there up until 1204 during the Fourth Crusade. Again, there's various theories as to who the Knights Templar may have taken it, or some group would have taken it, or a crusader or something like that. And that's how it eventually ended up in Liry, France. Now, there are alternative theories. I had Jack Markwart, and he doesn't believe that the shroud was the image of Edessa. He thinks that it's better to think it was this thing called the image of God incarnate, another cloth kind of thing. And it's kind of a similar story. Like it doesn't go to Edessa; it goes to Antioch instead, and for the first 100 years or so, and then eventually it ends up in Constantinople, where again during the Fourth Crusade, people take it and steal it and take it to France. So I don't have a firm opinion. I'm still kind of working it out, but yeah, I'll be posting up my panel review summary show, so you guys will find out what I think in the end. So yeah.
Good.
Cool.
Joe, what do you think about that? The image of Edessa.
I'm sort of in Dale's camp a little bit, in insofar as I'm not 100% sure on any of the theories. I guess I'm somewhat partial to the image of Edessa, partly because Wilson came up with that first, and his was one of the earliest books, and you tend, once you get a theory and you believe it at first, you kind of stick with it. Sort of like, I guess an analogy would be when you hear a song by your favorite artist or an artist, you really like that song, and then somebody redoes it, you just automatically like what you heard first. But I think there, quite a few, from what I could tell, a lot of the pro Shroud researchers do accept the image of Edessa, and then it becomes, in that theory, it becomes the Mandylion in excuse me, in Constantinople. And then there's some interesting descriptions of the Mandylion when it arrives in Constantinople 944. The emperor's sons describe it as blurred, which would be a good description of seeing the shroud with the naked eye. And someone else said it was some sort of secretion without coloring or stain, meaning it didn't appear to be a painting. It appeared to be some unnatural image formation process that they weren't sure of. And then I guess one of the biggest questions in history is exactly where was it after it left Constantinople, after it was stolen in 1204 and before it surfaced in France in about the 1350s. Guy Powell, who has a podcast, he's writing an historical fiction novel, and he says it's a plausible history of where the shroud may have been. So when that should be out soon, everybody can take a read at that and see what his theory is.
Yeah, so I want to. That's very interesting, and I think that's another way to refute the dating if you can actually track it through history. And so, going back to the image of Edessa, I just wanted to say I'm pretty new to looking at this particular argument, so I'm not going to claim that I know any more than anybody who's been researching it. Obviously, I'm way far behind you two, but I wanted to say, so apparently some people have looked at this idea of Apgar. So Apgar was a prince of Edessa, and he supposedly, according to Eusebius in his church histories, and you can look at Church History Book 1 and Book 2, he wrote a little bit about Apgar, and he wrote that this person was sick, I guess, and he supposedly tried to contact Jesus through writings, and he wanted Jesus to come and cure him. But Jesus, according to this, wrote back that he couldn't do that, but that he would send some of his disciples or one of his disciples to take care of him. And according to this whole thing, then you can find this again in church histories. But then what happened was he sent either Thaddeus, or I saw another one with a different name, but Eusebius names Thaddeus, one of the 70 apparently disciples. And Thaddeus went there, and there's another writing that corresponds to this, not from Eusebius, but Thaddeus went there, and he apparently brought the Shroud of Turin, or this image of Edessa, and that image itself is what helped to cure the prince. And so that's a story that would be contemporary with Jesus. And Eusebius, of course, wrote his book around 325, but that's a little part of that whole background.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'll just add for you, Stephanie, if you're interested, because yesterday I didn't just have my great Shroud debate. I had a show prior to it in the afternoon with Pam Moon, who came back and did a detailed presentation on she believes the image of Odessa hypothesis, right? So she goes into all of those details. And I even probed her because I'm a little bit skeptical of the Abgar legend. Like, I know that secular history says, look, Abgar the Eighth was the first convert to Christianity. He made it the official religion of the Kingdom of Edessa. That was around 200 AD, right? So obviously, this Abgar legend, you have Abgar the Fifth in Jesus' time, and communicating, and Jesus is sending written letters. So I have a little bit of skepticism. But Pam Moon's response, to be fair to the other side, she responded to that and said, well, there is plausibility because in Acts 16, I believe it is, it does speak about Paul giving, like, healing people through handkerchiefs and stuff like that. So that provides it's a plausibility argument that, well, it's plausible that cloths were being used to heal, and that's consistent with the Abgar legend. So that's my take on that. But yeah, check out I'll post up the Pam show on my.
Yeah, that sounds good.
My thing today. You can get the details. She does a great job arguing that case.
So if we look at the fact that the image itself is three-dimensional, some have said that itself is quite impressive. And so did anyone want to build on that thought of what it is about a 3D image that is so impressive?
Yeah. So in the first place, Barry will scold me if I don't just correct this. So in the first place, it's not actually three-dimensional. Obviously, it doesn't have 360 degrees, but it contains topographical information or depth information. So when you plug it into a VP8, it creates the 3D effect type thing that we see. But Barry will scold me if I say if I don't, qualify that it's not actually there's not 360 degrees of information like a statue. So, but this is an incredible finding. I mean, this is what got this finding in 1976, I think, was when they discovered. This is what led to STIRP. I mean, John and Jackson, they were amazed at this. And this is what got everybody involved. Like, what the heck is going on with these images? How can we explain them? And I will say that all of the mechanisms that I know of on the artistic end, and otherwise, they fail to reproduce the fullness of the 3D images and stuff. So there are some mechanisms where, for example, with a powder rubbing, if you use a bas relief, inherent in that is some 3D information. You'll get 3D effects and stuff like that, but it's only partial, and the 3D effects are very distorted. So with Luigi Garlascelli, for example, he's produced probably the best artistic copies of the Shroud to date. He's come the closest, but it's not close enough. It still fails. He basically gets like in the VP8, it'll come out as like steep cliffs and like deep valleys type thing. So that represents like contact versus no contact. You don't get the fine gradations that you get with the Shroud, where it represents the 3D depth info of an actual face. So these methods, these artistic methods, come nowhere close to representing the 3D info that we have on the Shroud type thing.
Yeah, I'd also add that Garlascelli used Barry's photographs for his model, and he did the body image first, and then put the blood on, which is what you'd expect. Any normal person would do that, but the Shroud evidence indicates that the blood went on first and then the image. Now, there's just no artist on the planet that would put the blood on first and then draw the body image around it. So that's another point toward authenticity. So yeah, I agree with Dale that Garlascelli's, to the naked eye, it looks fairly close to the Shroud, but to date, nobody has gotten both the physics and the chemistry right in their reproductions, and you have to do that. If you can't duplicate every single characteristic of the Shroud, you haven't duplicated it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think the Shroud is one piece of evidence that it's amazing that God has left this piece of evidence for us. And it's amazing that people have even postulated that somebody in the medieval times would be able to put together something with all of this different, all of these different components with the kind of technology that they didn't have back then.
And also, I mean, if you look at some, I just did an article recently about ancient reproductions of the Shroud, and most of them are just downright cartoonish. And if you know anything about the history of relics, you'll know that you know, people, you could draw a stick figure and convince some people that it was authentic. I mean, why would an artist go through all that trouble to do what he did on what we have on the Shroud, when a simple thing, any simple old thing would convince people? And why would you make an image that was hard to see, you know, further than 10 feet away or closer than 6? If you're going to forge something, you're going to forge it for an audience, and you're going to try to make them think it's the real thing. But there's characteristics on the Shroud that, you know, mitigate against an artist doing it.
Yeah, just to back up what Joe was saying there, like I'm convinced. I posted up a 20-minute video by Dr. Thomas de Westlow. Now, this guy is not Christian. He is a non-religious agnostic, and he fully concurs with us. He's like, there's nothing. He is an art historian. This is his area of expertise, medieval art. He's like, there's nothing comparable to the Shroud at all, and there's no way they would reproduce these features like photo negativity or the three-dimensionality. That's just totally unique. You know, and he's not biased. This is a non-religious agnostic. So yeah, if you want to go against that, I think it's clear who's the one that has the bias. You just don't want to believe at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because it's also my understanding, unless he's changed his mind, that Barry Schwartz is Jewish. He's not a person who believes that Jesus was divine, and he's the one who started this whole Shroud.com website and has been gathering all the information. And you both know him, so
Absolutely,
yeah.
go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say he works 12 hours a day, 7 days a week on the Shroud.
It's insane. Yeah, every time I call him, he's constantly working on the updates. So like, yeah, Barry deserves so much credit for that Shroud.com website. It's the best thing on the internet. I'm not sure if your audience already knows of him or not, but just to explain, like it's not just one side. He posts up all the scholarly, popular level papers. He has conferences, videos, book recommendations, and it's on all sides. I mean, it's not just pro Shroud. It's not just against the Shroud. There's Shroud agnostics there as well. So it really is the best resource. If you only have one place to go, that would be the best place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just went there this morning and I found a book there that's free, and it's on the Shroud, and it's written by a couple of people. And that's where I actually got into this Odessa thing. And I just because it's this morning, obviously you can see I'm brand new to that whole thing. I didn't have time to really dig into it, but that's why I mentioned that. But he has so many resources. And actually, Joe, you've got that regular email. We're on your personal email list, and both Dale and I are receiving your emails, which we greatly appreciate.
Oh, I enjoy doing it. And it's going to, of course, Lent and Easter. Well, it's Lent now, and Easter's coming up, and things even get busier. So I posted one with about 12 items Thursday night, and then a couple things came in right after, a couple significant ones. So I sent out an addendum Friday morning, and that had like 5 or 6 more items. So yeah, there's plenty of Shroud-related activities going on out there. I like to keep up with them and share it with other people.
I still think it's very funny that when I was doing a video last year on the Shroud, and I saw your name in the chat, and I thought, oh, that's funny. Now, how do I know that name? Isn't that the same name as the guy? No, it couldn't be.
It is.
I poke my nose in any Shroud activities. So yeah, it's going to be me.
How do you keep up to? You must have like some fancy software thing that alerts you.
No, I just do Google searches and YouTube searches, and I have sometimes people on my list will alert me to things, and I'm retired, and I work on the Shroud pretty much full time, so I just dig for all the information I can find.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll plug Joe. Like I was telling Stephanie about it before. Like my favorite thing of Joe's work, obviously it's great to get the updates and stuff like that. Also, one thing that you do really well is your bibliography papers. I've downloaded, I think, every one that I could get, including your bibliography of your bibliographies.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, he breaks it down into, okay, here are all the papers or links and sources related to the pro Shroud side on a given topic, the in the neutral, and then against kind of thing. So like, those are amazing resources on his academia.edu there. So yeah, great work.
Yeah, thank you. Stephanie, if for your listeners, if anybody wants to get on my email list, they can just email me at jmarino240 at AOL.com. That's JMARINO 240 at AOL.com. And everybody's blind copied, and you can ask to be removed from the list anytime if you want to get off.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So what else should we talk about? What else are we missing, or any sort of final? Because I know we're coming up on an hour pretty soon, but what else do you think people would want to know about the Shroud that you two have investigated?
That's a tough question because there is just so much material out there. I mean, just people can tell from just like we were just talking about how many items I come up weekly with videos and podcasts and articles. And I have to say, it kind of irks me when a lot of Hugh Ferry uses the term anti-authenticist, which I think is better than, sometimes I'll use the word skeptic, which probably isn't the best word, because as it was pointed out last night, we all should be skeptics, but sometimes I use the word to mean somebody that doesn't believe in the Shroud's authenticity. But you got to be willing, if you're going to investigate it, I think you need to be willing to spend a little time, go on Barry's site, and you got to do some homework. And it honestly just kind of irritates me when I see so many of these atheists and agnostics doing a podcast when they, as I said, know next to little or nothing about the Shroud, and then sort of give authoritative pronouncements that it's a fake. So I think my biggest piece of advice is do some research, take your time with it, and if don't be afraid to say, I'm not sure about this point, or even authenticity. I'll have to do more research.
Thank you. That's fair. And I want to say, Nikki's pointed out Pints with Aquinas' show. I watched that. It was amazing. So yeah, I definitely would recommend that too. Susan says she's read your book, so you also have a book. Dale, what else do you think we need to know about or think about?
Yeah, I guess my like parting thing here is, I would agree with what Joe's advice is here, is that it's key to look at the totality of the evidence, right? So many times on a popular level, you just hear one thing and okay, that's it. Now I've decided on this, but there's so much evidence out there, right? Like if you're on the skeptic side, the carbon dating, end of story kind of thing. No, nobody says that. Not even the carbon-14 scientists themselves. They would scold you and say, what's wrong with you? You have to look at the totality of the evidence. And that takes time, as Joe was saying, to kind of build that, deal with each individual piece of evidence in isolation. That's what I'm trying to do, kind of thing. And then make your overall judgment after that, kind of thing. And, on my Shroud panel review summary shows, I'm kind of unique in that I assign subjective probability values to each individual bit of the evidence. That helps me, right? Because then I can, at the end of it, after I assign those independently, I can plug it into Bayes' theorem and get that cumulative overall thing. And that tells me, okay, overall, do I think it's true or do I think it's false type thing? So the main point, if math's not your thing, but just take your time, break up all the bits of the individual evidence and assess it as best you can, and then make an overall judgment. Don't just be carbon dating. Okay, I'm done. I can dismiss it now. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason that it's the most intensely studied artifact in human history, and that's because it hasn't been solved yet, and people keep on putting hours into it to try to solve it. Nobody has solved it yet, even though if you listen to some of the skeptics, they say, oh, here's my rendition, I've solved it. No, they haven't solved it. I guarantee you they haven't.
Joe, what was it? I remember on SSG, you we kind of asked how many academic disciplines are related, and I think it was over 90 disciplines.
I'm up to 97 at the moment. That's one of my academia articles. And
Wow.
what medieval forger was going to be proficient in all 97 of those disciplines to be able to create an image that fooled 20th and 21st century researchers? I'm sorry that he doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, good. I think I agree with both of you. So what are you working on now? What do you have going on in the next few weeks or over this Lenten season? What's new? What's for both of you?
Yeah, for me, believe it or not, upcoming Shroud related shows. I guess I have Michael Kowalski. Hopefully next week will be coming on. He's publishing a book and stuff, and he's on the carbon dating. He told me, I don't understand it yet until he presents his case, but he's found some new aspects that have never been heard before about the carbon dating. So looking forward to that. I also have Jack Markwart is going to be debating Hugh Ferry on the medieval documents. So, that 1389 memorandum and the papal bulls, they're going to be doing an actual one-on-one debate together on March 8th. So that's my plans for the Shroud related shows in the future.
I got to get a link in your channel down in the description. I'll make sure I have that so everybody can go subscribe to your channel. Joe, do you have a channel too?
I do not.
But so they can contact you by email though.
And they can also contact me by on academia.edu. My main focus is usually writing articles and posting them there. Some of my articles have discussion groups so people can make comments. And I have one article being proofread by a friend. I hope to have, she's had it about a week, so I hope to see that soon, and I'll be posting that soon too.
Great. So
yeah, I'm just posting in the private chat my blog and YouTube for you. So there you go.
Oh, well, can we share that? Just let people know.
Oh, should I put it in the comments?
So your YouTube is under Real Seekers, and your blog. Yeah, you can put it in the comments. Just put it. Oh, you might not have I can give you a wrench. I haven't. Let me see you in here, and I'll give you a wrench real quick so you can throw it in the comments.
Okay. All right. I have no idea what a wrench is, but
on YouTube. If I see either of you, I can give you guys wrenches so that you can post whatever links you want. So you're considered a moderator.
There we go. Oh, geez, I'm moving on up. I'm taking over your channel, Stephanie.
Otangelo, I just heard something from Otangelo about getting hacked, though. I want to say, notice lately on my Facebook account, I'm getting hundreds of requests to follow me, and I allowed a few of them if they had quite a few mutual friends. But now I'm thinking these requests are coming from people I have no idea who they are, and I think I might just go ahead and reject all the ones that are pending right now because I don't want to run that risk. So welcome everybody here in the chat. Just want to say hi to you really quickly. I'm trying to see if I can, Dale, I don't see you in this. Maybe that's why you're not on this comment. Okay, I'm going to post what you said to the link here. So let me just get this blog going. Hold on one second. Right. Real Seeker Ministries.
That's the blog, .wordpress.com. And on YouTube, just Real Seekers with the S, it's plural.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely, I'll put that in the description too.
And I'm adding my academia page, independent.academia.edu/Joe Marino.
Great.
I just posted that in the private chat.
Oh, I see it here. Okay.
So we have Otangelo in the chat. What was his thoughts on the debate last night? Was he happy with it?
Otangelo, what'd you think?
He's a huge Shroud guy. Otangelo, I'll give you credit. Joe sent me the link to your massive research link on the Shroud of Turin. So I think you've done amazing work yourself. So.
Oh, I didn't realize he had so good. Yeah, next time I'll have to get Otangelo to come in here too. Next time we've been going a while, but we'll definitely have maybe four of us have this further discussion and hammer some of these things out. So thank you guys for coming on my channel today. Please, everybody, if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. I will be making more Shroud videos because I do find it a fascinating topic. I think that we want the truth to get out because the truth will set us free.
Absolutely.
So I want to say also thank you to Jedediah, GM Thrust, Kyrie Eliason, Taking Back Eden, just the people I'm seeing in the chat here. Captive Desk, I saw was going. Nikki, definitely say hi to you too. Shiami, Tom Jokaj, Kyrie Eliason. So again, it's just wonderful to see everybody here. Susan, of course, was here before. I think she's still probably here. So you guys have a great day. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys.
Good to
Thank
see
you.